Hey guys, tonight we walk straight into the kind of dawn that stings your cheeks before you're even fully awake. The air bites at your lungs, the snow crunches under your boots like splintering glass, and the world around you is nothing but white silence broken by the creak of armor. You're on a medieval battlefield in winter, where ice itself is the deadliest warrior. And just so you know, you probably won't survive this, unless you've got chainmail lined with wool, an iron will, and maybe a flask of something stronger than cider.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, post your location and local time down below. I love seeing how far this little campfire of stories reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a frozen plain at dawn, your breath rising in pale ghosts that vanish too quickly. Knights around you huddle deeper into their cloaks, their helms glittering with frost as if the night had tried to freeze them solid. The battlefield doesn't roar with trumpets or drums, it groans. Ice cracks under the weight of men and horses, and every sound seems magnified in the brittle stillness that a straightforward fact. Winter campaigns weren't rare. From the Teutonic Knights in Prussia to the Mongols pushing into Europe, armies often fought in freezing months when supplies of food and firewood dictated the very rhythm of war. But winter turned every movement into a gamble. Marching too long meant frostbite. Camping too early meant starving. You hear a knight mutter through chattering teeth, "Steel cuts quick, but frost cuts deeper." He's not wrong. The frost claims fingers, noses, and morale before swords are ever drawn. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers claimed warriors would urinate on their sword blades before battle in the cold, not for mysticism, but to keep the steel from shattering on first impact. Makes you wonder what their squires thought of that polishing job. The horizon brightens slowly, the sun climbing like it's reluctant to leave its warm bed. Light reveals a world transformed. Trees glitter as though dusted with powdered glass. The castle in the distance looks carved from crystal, but you know better. It's just stone with icicles daggering down from its ramparts. Even beauty here is edged with menace. Historians still argue whether winter battles were truly strategic choices or desperate necessities. Did commanders plan to freeze their enemies into surrender, or did they simply get stuck when the weather turned faster than expected? You look around at the knights stamping their feet, shaking snow from their shoulders, and realize maybe both are true. Ambition doesn't check the calendar. The enemy is out there, just beyond the tree line, their fires still smoldering in the pale light. You can almost smell the smoke, carried sharp and thin on the cold wind. But no charge comes. Winter mornings make everyone cautious. Horses are stiff, bowstrings brittle, and soldiers half frozen before swords even leave their scabbards. For now, it's a standoff between patience and frostbite. You draw your cloak tighter and watch the clouds of breath mingle above the line of knights. The cold seeps into your bones, whispering that it doesn't care about banners or kings. And as the day stretches slowly awake, you realize the greatest enemy here isn't the knight across the field. It's the winter itself, grinning invisibly, waiting to see who breaks first. Asterisk, you shift your weight in the snow, stamping your feet like the other soldiers to keep the blood flowing. And you start to notice how each knight looks more like a walking bundle of laundry than a shining warrior. Forget the clean, gleaming armor of storybooks. Winter demands layers, and layers mean bulk. A knight in January is less swan-like elegance and more waddling oven mitt. First comes the base: linen, shirts, woolen hose, maybe even padded undergarments if they're lucky. Then the gambeson, a quilted jacket so thick it could stop a kitchen knife, though not always the cold. Over that, chainmail clinks and sags, heavy with frost, and then steel plates strapped on top. You look around and think, these poor men aren't armored heroes, they're medieval lasagnas. And yet, somehow, they must fight like this. Here's your historical anchor. Cold weather clothing in medieval Europe was a mix of fur, wool, and ingenious layering. Chronicles from Scandinavia describe nobles draped in wolf pelts, while soldiers on campaign often wore sheepskin cloaks lined with straw for insulation. Mail and plate, though protective, conducted cold straight into the bones, so padding wasn't optional. It was survival. A quirky tidbit from a Prussian chronicle claims. Knights sometimes stuffed their boots with moss to insulate their toes. Moss. Forget Air Jordans. Apparently, you just needed a swamp nearby to survive January. Imagine explaining that to a squire. Run along now. Fetch me the softest bog you can find. You watch one knight attempt to adjust his gauntlet. The leather straps have stiffened in the frost, and it takes two squires tugging like oxen to loosen it. Another tries to pull his fur-lined hood over his helmet and looks briefly like a bear stuck in a barrel. Still, no one dares laugh, not when breath fogs out of their nostrils like smoke from a dragon, reminding them how thin the line is between warmth and disaster. Historians still argue whether knights truly adapted effectively to winter fighting or whether chroniclers exaggerated their resilience. Some point to accounts of campaigns continuing despite deep snow as proof of adaptability. Others argue soldiers likely suffered far more than the records admit, since no commander wanted to admit he'd frozen half his army before reaching the battlefield. The sun crawls a little higher, gleaming on steel that now looks less like armor and more like a collection of mirrors reflecting snow. The irony doesn't escape you. Knights are supposed to dazzle in battle, yet here, the shine just makes them walking beacons for enemy archers. Still, the layers matter more than appearances. Beneath those furs and quilts and leather straps, survival is stitched together thread by thread, and as you wrap your cloak tighter, listening to the creak of frozen chainmail around you, you realize that in winter war, the fight starts long before swords clash. It starts in the wardrobe, in the desperate hope that enough wool and fur can outwait the cold for just one more day. Snowflakes drift sideways, pushed by a wind that seems to know exactly how to sneak down the back of your collar. The column begins to move. You hitch your cloak, grip your pack tighter, and follow the knights as they trudge into the white void. A march in summer can be exhausting, sure, but a march in winter is a trial by ice. You don't sweat, you freeze. Every step is a gamble between keeping up and sinking into drifts deep enough to swallow a man whole. The knights ahead of you leave boot-shaped craters that quickly soften under falling snow. Horses grunt and snort clouds of steam, their hooves slipping on frozen ruts. A cartwheel snaps against a buried rock, sending curses into the air that steam just as brightly. You hear the driver shout something about selling his soul for a paved road, and honestly, who wouldn't? Historical anchor. Armies did march in winter, especially in regions like Eastern Europe where frozen ground actually made travel possible. Roads that were muddy quagmires in autumn hardened into icy tracks. Chroniclers note that the Teutonic Knights favored winter raids because rivers froze, creating straight, icy highways. But the same ice that helped you move also punished every stumble. Quirky tidbit. One chronicler from Livonia claimed men tied wooden boards to their boots, early skis, essentially, to glide over snow while scouting. Whether that worked or just produced spectacular wipeouts is unclear, but it's oddly comforting to picture medieval knights skiing into battle like clumsy holiday tourists. The snow deepens as the day wears on. Men start breaking formation too. Follow the narrow path trampled by those ahead, creating a single file line that winds like a serpent across the white plain. You can hear the rhythm of armor creaking, horses slipping, and the occasional yelp when someone vanishes waist-deep into a drift. Progress slows to a crawl, the landscape unchanged, as though you've been walking in place for hours. Historians still argue whether such marches truly moved armies efficiently or simply exhausted them before battle. Was winter mobility a clever strategy or just a slow bleed of morale? You glance at the faces around you, red with windburn, eyes watering from the glare off the snow, and suspect the answer depends on whether you were the commander making the plan or the soldier actually trudging it. By late afternoon, frost has collected on beards, helmets, and even the horses' manes. The wind never stops. You taste iron in the air, part from the cold and part from biting your tongue to keep from complaining. The man next to you mutters that he'd rather face 10 enemy knights in summer than march one more mile through this frozen wasteland. No one disagrees. And yet, the column keeps moving. Because in winter, the fight isn't about clashing swords or flying banners. It's about endurance, step after painful step, through snow that erases the road, through cold that gnaws like an invisible enemy. You trudge onward, realizing that the real battlefield begins long before you ever see the opposing army. Asterisk, the march halts at dusk, when the horizon glows faintly orange and the cold deepens like a blade pressing closer to skin. You shuffle into a makeshift camp, boots caked in snow, breath rattling in your chest. Men hurry to unload carts, fumbling with stiff fingers to pull out tent poles and firewood. But winter laughs at firewood. Everything is damp, frozen, or already burned on yesterday's fire. A night tries striking flint against steel, sparks leaping uselessly into the wind. Another curses and huddles around a pile of twigs, blowing like a man trying to coax life back into a dying pet. At last, a thin flame catches, and suddenly every soldier within sight edges closer, hands outstretched, shadows huge on the snow. You push in too, greedy for warmth, feeling the icy ache in your toes ease just a little. Here's your historical anchor. Frostbite was a silent killer in medieval campaigns. Chronicles from Scandinavian wars mention soldiers losing fingers and toes long before swords drew blood. Poor footwear, frozen leather straps, and long exposure meant winter-wounded armies as surely as enemy steel. A quirky tidbit. A 14th century scribe in Poland noted that soldiers sometimes tucked hot stones inside their boots at night to stave off frostbite. He then added, somewhat dryly, that many woke up with burns worse than the frost. Medieval solutions. Always 2 steps forward, 1 step screaming. You watch knights peeling off layers, steam rising faintly as they huddle near fires. Meat on spits crackles, though the portions are thin, and a pot of stew looks more like warm water flavored with onion peel. Men slurp it anyway, grateful for anything that fills the hollow in their bellies. A horse whinnies in the distance, tied near a windbreak of pine, and the sound is oddly human, as if the beast too wants a seat. By the fire, historians still argue whether winter encampments were truly survivable for long stretches. Some chronicles praise the discipline of certain orders, keeping men fed and fires burning. Others hint at chaos. Tents collapsing under snow, men deserting in the night, disease spreading when soldiers huddled too close. You look around this camp and think both might be true at once. Some fires blaze bravely, others sputter and die. The jokes start, small and brittle, because laughter warms better than wool. One knight holds up a frozen piece of bread, knocks it against his helm, and declares it harder than his shield. The men chuckle weakly, though no one wants to break a tooth proving it. Another mutters, if the enemy doesn't kill me, my bladder will. It's too cold to leave the fire. Groans of agreement ripple around. You know exactly what he means. You lie down near the embers, cloak pulled tight, the snow beneath you lumpy and merciless. Sleep doesn't come easy. The wind worms through gaps in the tent, the fire hisses low, and the chorus of coughs, snores, and muttered prayers rises around you. The stars outside glitter with cruel indifference. And you realize, in winter war, the nights are longer than the battles. You don't win by charging bravely. You win by surviving till dawn. The dawn doesn't so much arrive as it creeps, pale and reluctant, over a landscape already numb to its own suffering. You push yourself out of a tent stiff with frost and glance toward the castle on the horizon. Its towers are rimed with ice, windows shuttered tight, smoke curling sluggishly from chimneys. A siege in summer is cruel enough. In winter, it becomes a contest not just of patience, but of survival. You watch soldiers gather around siege engines, their hands raw and red from handling ropes and frozen beams. Trebuchets groan like old men as ice cracks in their joints. Ladders, left out overnight, are stiff with frost, and every rung threatens to snap. One knight mutters that scaling walls is hard enough without having to fight a staircase that bites. Back. Historical anchor. Winter sieges were notoriously brutal. At the siege of Béziers in 1209, freezing rains turned the ground to ice, making both attackers and defenders miserable. In Eastern Europe, frozen moats sometimes became roads for besiegers, but more often they trapped armies in months of attrition. Castles, stocked with grain and firewood, could outlast attackers who shivered in open camps. Quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest besieging armies would dump buckets of water against castle walls in freezing weather, hoping to coat them in slick ice. Imagine being a defender leaning out with a kettle of boiling water only to slip on your own rampart seconds later. History's slapstick is underrated. From your vantage, you see men hacking at a frozen moat with axes, trying to break through. Thick ice to find water, or maybe weaken it so a collapse will swallow attackers. Every blow rings out like a church bell across the valley. Above them, defenders peer over battlements, bundled in cloaks, their arrows tipped with frost. They don't waste shafts yet. In winter, every arrow is as precious as bread. Historians still argue whether winter truly favored attackers or defenders. Defenders had walls and supplies, but risked disease in cramped halls. Attackers suffered exposure, yet sometimes ice gave them opportunities to breach walls or cross moats. You squint at the castle and wonder who feels more desperate tonight. The ones huddled inside with dwindling grain, or the ones outside burning their last firewood. The day drags on. A catapult lobs a stone, the impact muffled by snow as it shatters against the wall. The defenders answer with a rain of rocks. Both sides slip, stumble, and curse as cold stiffens muscles and numbs fingers. You hear a knight beside you sigh. It's less a battle than a long argument with winter as judge. He's not wronged up by dusk. Fires flicker in both camps. The castle windows glow faintly. The besiegers' tents smoke like weary lungs. You realize the siege will not end with one dramatic charge. It will be a contest of endurance. Who starves first? Who freezes faster? Who loses faith before the other? And as snow begins again, soft and endless, you suspect the real victor is neither army but the winter itself, patient and pitiless. Asterisk, your breath fogs in the frigid air as the column shifts once more, this time toward the broad shimmer of a frozen river. At first it looks beautiful, a strip of silver glass stretching between snowbound banks, glittering under pale sunlight. But beauty, you quickly learn, is just another trap in winter war. That glittering ribbon could carry an army swiftly forward, or crack beneath its weight, swallowing men and horses without a trace. Knights halt on the near bank, stamping hooves and shifting in their saddles. The ice groans faintly, a sound that settles deep into your bones. One commander jabs his spear into the surface, listening for reassurance. The silence afterward is worse than an answer. A river in winter is like a gambler with a crooked smile. You never know if you're about to win a shortcut or lose everything. That here's your historical anchor. Armies did use frozen rivers as roads. Chroniclers describe the Mongols thundering across icebound waterways, striking where enemies never expected. In northern Europe, rivers that were impassable in thaw became highways of conquest when solid. Yet countless stories also tell of troops lost when ice betrayed them, vanishing into freezing black water. Quirky tidbit. One 13th century account claims soldiers scattered straw and pine branches across frozen rivers to trick the ice into thinking it was land. You're not sure the physics work that way, but the psychology must have mattered. Nobody likes stepping on a glass when their life depends on it. The first horse steps forward, hooves clattering like drums. Men hold their breath. The ice flexes, a low groan rippling out, then stills. Another horse follows, then 2, then 20. The army trickles across in cautious lines, each man pretending he doesn't hear the cracks echoing underneath. A cartwheel catches on a ridge and splinters. Its load spills into the snow, and everyone freezes, waiting for the ice to retaliate. Somehow it doesn't. The column inches on. Historians still argue whether commanders truly trusted these crossings or were simply forced into them by necessity. Was it bold strategy or reckless desperation? Standing here, you suspect both. Nothing about the frozen river feels safe, yet the alternative, marching miles around through forests and snow, could bleed an army DRYB by the time you reach the far bank. Your legs shake with tension more than cold. You glance back at the icy highway, scarred now with tracks and splinters, and wonder how many armies never made it this far. The knights press on, relieved but quieter than before. Because in winter, every step across ice feels like bargaining with death, and sometimes the bargain holds, and sometimes the river takes its price. Asterisk, the river is behind you now, but the smell of horses hangs heavy in the cold air. You follow the column as it slows, knights dismounting to check their mounts' hooves and flanks. Winter is merciless on men, Yes, but even more so on the great war horses that carry them. These beasts, bred for power and endurance, now stand, steaming and shivering, their breath rising in clouds as though they are chimneys sprouting legs. You run your hand over a horse's flank. It's damp, not from sweat, but from condensation where the warm body meets freezing air. Steam curls upward, frost forming along the animal's mane. The knight pats his steed's neck and mutters something half like a prayer, half like a threat, promising both oats and survival if it keeps moving. Here's your historical anchor. Medieval destriers, the great war horses, were the engines of knightly warfare. Yet in winter, their strength faltered. Chronicles tell of horses slipping on ice, hooves cracking, and bellies shriveling when forage vanished under snow. An army without its mounts wasn't much of an army at all. Quirky tidbit. One scribe claimed knights in Lithuania wrapped their horses' hooves in straw boots to stop slipping. He noted that while it worked, the horses looked ridiculous, like clumsy farm beasts playing dress-up. You can almost imagine the soldiers trying not to laugh as their noble chargers clip-clopped along in makeshift slippers. You hear the squeak of frozen leather straps as knights adjust saddles stiff with ice. Some horses nibble at snow for water, their muzzles frosting white. But snow alone can't sustain them. The grain stores are running low. Men argue over dwindling sacks of oats, weighing whether to feed themselves or their mounts. Hunger here is a duel with no fair rules. Historians still argue whether armies truly managed to keep their horses alive through long winters or whether chronicles exaggerated endurance to make campaigns seem grander. Evidence suggests many campaigns. Bled animals dry. Bones found near old encampments hint at desperate slaughter when supplies gave out. You look at the horses stamping against the cold, eyes rolling with fatigue, and you realize they are not just transport. They are comrades in this strange frozen war. Partners who must endure the same snow, the same frost, the same gnawing hunger. Knights might wear steel, but horses carry the weight of winter on their backs, and as you trudge onward beside them, you sense the truth. In these frozen months, survival depends not just on men with swords, but on the trembling beasts whose hooves must keep breaking the snow open, step after weary step. The march grows thinner, quieter, and you begin to notice the real enemy stalking the army: hunger. It gnaws at the men with teeth sharper than frost, wearing them down in ways no sword could. You watch a supply cart creak past, its canvas stiff with frost, wheels squealing as if the wood itself complains. A squire lifts the cover, and the smell is unmistakable: grain sacks gone musty, salted meat crusted with white mold. Even food stored for war shrivels against winter's patience. Men crowd the cart, hands reaching. The steward waves them back with a staff, shouting that rations must stretch another week. The soldiers grumble, but they retreat. Rebellion takes more energy than they have to spare. One mutters that snow might taste better than the stew waiting tonight. Another licks his lips like he's serious. Historical anchor. Supply lines were the arteries of medieval warfare. In summer, carts of grain, wine, and fodder trickled steadily from towns to camps. But in winter, roads iced over, rivers froze, and wagons sank axle-deep in snow. Armies starved not because they lacked courage, but because their stomachs were empty. A quirky tidbit. In one Scandinavian chronicle, starving men supposedly boiled leather straps from their armor to make soup. The scribe wrote that it tasted like sorrow. You can imagine the camp joke. Would you like your belt roasted or stewed? You wander toward the cooking fires where soldiers huddle. A pot of gruel simmers, more water than oats, the steam. A taunt against hollow bellies. Men shuffle forward with wooden bowls, eyes fixed on the thin swirl, as if staring harder might thicken it. Someone drops a crust into the snow, and half the camp stares before the dog snatches it. The silence afterward is louder than the wind. Historians still argue whether famine shaped outcomes more than battles in winter campaigns. Some suggest that more armies fell to empty supply wagons than to enemy swords. Others claim commanders exaggerated hardship afterward to excuse poor results. Watching this camp, you lean toward the first theory. The hunger here is undeniable, etched into faces and muttered prayers. That night, the wind howls through the tents. You curl up, listening, to stomachs growl louder than snores. A knight mutters beside you. We fight tomorrow on half a bowl. You realize the truth. In this frozen war, the victor might not be the side with more swords, but the side with more bread. Asterisk snow hisses softly in the dark as you wander toward the archers' lines. They sit hunched around their bundles of bows, stringing and unstringing with grim patience. Winter makes their work more than deadly. It makes it unpredictable. You crouch beside one, watching him tug gently at a bowstring that creaks like an old door hinge. The man curses under his breath. Frost stiffens hemp fibers, making them brittle, prone to snapping at the worst moment. He breathes on the string, trying to soften it, then tucks it under his cloak against his chest for warmth. Another archer cradles a bundle of arrows, each shaft feathered carefully but stiff with ice. He holds one up, the tip gleaming faintly white. Ice arrows, he mutters, not because they're magical, but because the snow has frozen onto the heads like tiny knives. Here's your historical anchor. Medieval archers did fight in winter campaigns, but freezing temperatures were their greatest enemy. English longbowmen at Agincourt in 1415 battled mud and cold that ruined bowstrings. Archery manuals advised unstringing bows at night to protect them from damp. In frost, a snapped string wasn't just inconvenient. It could be fatal. Quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers in Eastern Europe swore archers used goose fat to grease their bowstrings, preventing ice from forming. The smell apparently attracted stray dogs, which became an unwanted but oddly loyal part of the army. Imagine firing arrows while fending off enthusiastic camp mutts. The line forms slowly. Archers notch arrows with fingers stiff as wood, shoulders hunched against the wind. They raise bows, a creaking chorus like branches in a storm, and release. The flight is eerie, shafts streaking against white sky, disappearing into the haze. A few strike shields with dull thunks. Others bury themselves in snowbanks, invisible, waiting like traps for careless boots. Historians still argue whether archery effectiveness truly dropped in cold or whether chroniclers exaggerated mishaps. Did snow and frost cripple longbow units? Or did discipline and preparation overcome the elements? Looking at these men, faces raw, hands trembling, you suspect the truth is in the middle. Archery still kills, but winter turns every shot into a gamble. One archer laughs bitterly after his arrow shatters on a frozen shield. Might as well throw icicles, he says. Another replies, at least they're free. Even here, humor keeps the cold at bay. You pull your cloak tighter, watching the next volley vanish into the storm. The sound of arrows fades, leaving only the wind, reminding you that in winter, even weapons seem to fight reluctantly. Asterisk the clamor of bows fades, replaced by the heavy clank of steel. You turn toward the ranks of knights and men-at-arms struggling to prepare for battle, and the sight is almost comical, if it weren't so deadly serious. Armor, which already weighs like a stubborn mule, becomes a frozen prison in winter. Leather. Straps stiffen until they crack, buckles seize up, and the joints of plate harnesses grind like doors that haven't been oiled in a century. A knight stomps his feet, trying to force his greaves into place. Frost crunches where leather should flex. His squire hammers the straps with a mallet, hoping the impact loosens them. Another soldier tries to lower his visor, only to discover it's frozen half shut from the condensation of his breath the night before. You can't help thinking it looks like someone locked themselves into a medieval tin. Here's your historical anchor. Armor was an incredible feat of engineering, but in cold weather it was punishing. Mail conducted heat away from the body like 1,000 little icy straws. Plate harnesses, though more protective, locked up when moisture froze in the joints. Chroniclers describe men forced to thaw their gauntlets by fire before they could grip a sword. Quirky tidbit. One German tale claims soldiers sometimes poured ale over frozen buckles to melt the ice. Of course, the story adds that they usually regretted wasting perfectly good ale. Priorities. After all, as you move among the ranks, you see men swinging their arms awkwardly, trying to keep blood flowing to hands encased in steel shells. Swords clang clumsily against shields, not from lack of skill, but because winter robs precision. A knight mutters, I fight less like a lion and more like a puppet. No one disagrees. Historians still argue whether winter truly diminished the effectiveness of armored troops. Some say discipline and training outweighed Frost's interference, while others insist frozen armor turned battles into clumsy, shoving matches rather than elegant duels. Watching now, you see the truth. Every movement costs twice the effort. Every strike feels like it's through molasses. Then the horn sounds. Men lurch forward, boots sliding on icy ground. Shields lock together, swords rise stiffly, and you realize this isn't a battle of swift charges. It's a battle of endurance, where every strap, buckle, and frozen hinge is another enemy to overcome. Steel may shine, but today it creaks, groans, and resists as much as the opposing army does. The sun sinks early in winter, dragging the battlefield into a dim half-light long before anyone feels ready to stop fighting. You stand on a ridge as men cluster around torches, their flames bending sideways in the wind. And then you notice something eerie. Battle doesn't stop at sunset here. It glows, fires bloom across the field. Archers dip rags in pitch, winding them around arrowheads before loosing them skyward. The shafts hiss and streak like comets, tracing brief arcs of orange against the indigo sky before plunging into snowbanks and enemy shields. Some sputter out instantly, steam rising as snow devours flame. Others catch, setting tents alight, their glow pulsing like lanterns of doom. Historical anchor. Flaming projectiles were indeed used in medieval warfare, especially during sieges. Pitch, tar, and resin-soaked cloth could turn arrows, stones, or pots into fiery weapons. In winter, fire became not just a weapon but a statement. It broke the white monotony, terrified horses, and lit the chaos when nights fell too soon. Quirky tidbit. One chronicler joked that soldiers in Novgorod roasted sausages over fire arrows before shooting them. You can't prove it wasn't just dark humor, but you admit the mental picture of a knight carefully skewering his dinner before launching it is almost too good. The glow spreads. Catapults hurl barrels filled with resin. When they burst, fire dances across the snow in bright ribbons, leaving black scars where white once stretched endless. Torches are thrown into the melee, illuminating the clash of steel in sudden bursts. You see men's shadows leaping across drifts like monstrous doubles, here one moment, gone the next. Historians still argue whether night fighting in winter was common or mostly avoided. Some claim torches and fire arrows were too unpredictable in snowstorms, while others insist they offered critical advantage when days were too short to finish campaigns. You glance around and think, short daylight leaves little choice. Someone always fights by fire. The cold, strangely, makes the spectacle sharper. Each flame seems brighter against the dark, each hiss louder when snow douses fire. You smell smoke, resin, and scorched leather, mixing with the clean sting of frost. Knights clash in the flicker, their armor reflecting flames like moving mirrors. Horses rear, spooked by sudden sparks, their riders swearing as they struggle to hold lines steady. The battle doesn't roar so much as it crackles. Fire devours snow, snow devours fire, and the two forces argue as much as the men do. You stand transfixed, realizing you're watching not just a fight of armies but of elements, flame and frost, locked in their own duel across the frozen night. When the fires burn low and the battlefield quiets, the real voices begin, the whispers. You hear them carried on the icy wind as soldiers huddle near embers, their faces shadowed by flickering light. Steel and frost are visible enemies, but in winter, imagination grows teeth. A man beside you swears he saw shapes moving in the storm, figures draped in white, gliding without sound across the snow. He claims they are spirits of warriors long dead, condemned to wander until their bones finally thaw. Others nod, too weary to laugh. In the cold, belief comes easy to. Here's your historical anchor. Medieval soldiers often turned to superstition during harsh campaigns. Amulets, charms, and prayers against frost were common. Chroniclers record men carrying relics, splinters of saints' bones, scraps of cloth, to ward off the bite of winter. Whether those relics warmed the body or only the spirit, they mattered. All the same, quirky tidbit. One Polish tale describes soldiers carving faces into icicles and setting them around camp to scare away demons of the cold. Practical? No. Terrifying when they melt at dawn and appear to weep? Absolutely. You watch as a knight carefully ties a sprig of holly to his sword hilt, murmuring that no frost can cling to blessed wood. Another man traces a cross in the snow, before lying down, convinced it will shield his dreams from icy nightmares. These gestures cost nothing, but they offer a kind of armor no forge could make. Historians still argue whether such practices were genuine faith, convenient morale boosters, or just desperation wrapped in ritual. Were the soldiers truly convinced the holly or the icicles mattered, or did they simply need something, anything, to pretend they had control over the cold? You lean toward the latter, but as the wind howls like a banshee, you understand why. They cling to it. The storm thickens. Snow lashes the tents, rattling canvas like angry spirits demanding entry. You lie awake, hearing the mutter of prayers, the click of rosaries, the trembling laughter of men daring each other to step into the dark. And then silence, heavy and absolute. The cold has its own religion, you realize. It demands belief whether you want to give it or not. And in the heart of winter war, every soldier becomes a worshiper, of fire, of relics, of whispers in the snow. Asterisk, by now you understand that winter has been auditioning as the real commander, and honestly, it got the part. You wake to a camp that hasn't moved in days, and yet somehow you feel farther along than any forced march could carry you. The enemy banners still flicker on the far ridge, but their fires look fewer, their lines thinner, as if the cold has been quietly doing recruiting for your side all night. You sip a cup of something that calls itself broth with a straight face, and you realize victory in this season isn't a trumpet blast. It's a sigh the other army gives when it finally decides to go home alive that a simple fact anchors you in. The Baltic frontier, the Teutonic Knights ran deliberate winter raids, winterizing, because frozen swamps and rivers became passable, and enemies starved faster than they rallied. Endurance, not drama, tipped the balance. Elsewhere, whole campaigns pivoted on who could keep men fed and horses standing when the world turned to glass. The ledger, not the lance, closed the argument. You watch the steward make his rounds, counting sacks, counting faces. He counts everything that can be counted and then counts again, because numbers are easier to boss than weather. The list of unfit for service grows. Frostbitten archers with fingers bandaged like little mummies, horses with hooves cracked from ice, men whose eyes are red with snow glare, blinking at the world as if winter has replaced their eyelids with sandpaper. The miracle is not that anyone can still fight, it's that anyone can still stand. Across the valley, messengers bring rumors wrapped in frost. The enemy's grain wagons never arrived. Their commander has started rationing candles. Their smiths can't keep fires hot enough to temper a nail, let alone a sword. Every tidbit is small, but together they read like a prophecy you can believe. The cold will make the decision for them. Quirky tidbit floats through camp. Someone swears the rival lord issued snow days, excusing his men from drilling during blizzards so morale wouldn't crack like river ice under a cart. Officially, that sounds sensible. Unofficially, your side calls it the truce of runny noses and toasts it with the last actual wine anyone has seen in a week. Jokes, like fires, burn longer when fuel is scarce. Also, yes, someone tries to toast with the broth. It does not improve. At midday, you stand watch with an old sergeant whose mustache has frozen into two accusing icicles. He explains the winter doctrine in 7 words. Eat, sleep, stay warm, don't be stupid. Then, after a beat, stupidity includes heroics. You nod, because heroics don't move bread, and bread moves everything else. Somewhere a horn sounds half-heartedly, as if even the brass has caught a chill. Historians still argue whether wins wars or merely chooses who cashes in their competence. Did the cold itself decide famed campaigns, or did thoughtful logistics let one side outlast the other? The debate sharpens around tales like the 1242 Battle on the Ice, when Alexander Nevsky met the Teutonic Knights on Lake Peipus. Chronicles celebrate shattered enemies and treacherous ice. Skeptics note the ground was probably slushy spring, not a mirror of doom, and that the victory owed as much to position as to temperature. You stand in your own gray daylight and feel the argument in your bones. Leadership matters, but weather keeps the ledger. Afternoon brings tiny proofs of momentum. A patrol returns with 3 cows and one astonishing story about a farmer who traded them for a promise of tax forgiveness, signed by anyone who can hold a pen. The steward signs. To be fair, his handwriting already looks like frostbite. A forager team discovers a hidden stack of peat bricks, and the cheer that erupts would embarrass a tournament crowd. No glory, only warmth. And warmth is the coin that spins. You take stock of your little victories. The horse, boots, tied with straw. Half the mounts keep their footing now, and the ones that don't at least look festive. The goose-fat trick on bowstrings. Fewer snaps, more shots, and a pack of opportunistic dogs that have effectively joined the regiment. The moss-stuffed boots? Call it nature's sock. Nobody's toes love it, but they are still toes. Small hacks compound like interest, survival. Is arithmetic, negotiations, once snarled in pride, suddenly discover manners. A herald crosses the snow under a ragged flag of truce that has seen better laundry days. His lord proposes an exchange of prisoners and suggests both armies retire to winter quarters. You can hear the subtext from here. We are tired of practicing our shivering. Can we invoice fate and leave? Your captain answers with courtly phrases about mutual exhaustion and honor satisfied. Neither side mentions the real general, cold, nodding in approval behind them. Night returns brisk and blue. Fires rim the camp like a necklace of small suns. You sit with men who have stopped pretending they'll be warm in 5 minutes and started celebrating being less cold than yesterday. Someone passes dried apples. Someone else produces a heel of cheese with the ceremony of unveiling a relic. The talk turns to home in that careful way soldiers do. Short sentences, long pauses, laughter that ends gently, as if words might crack like ice if you drop them. You think back over the last days, the river that pretended to be a road, the siege that devolved into a staring contest with icicles, the night sky shot through with fire and steam, the charms and icicle faces set up like little frosty saints, the armor that fought its own wearer, the soup of sorrow boiled from leather when the stew surrendered. You realize the common lesson isn't bravado, it's pacing. Winter teaches you to spend energy like coin and to treat warmth like treasure. Morning brings a surprise shaped like relief. Watchers on the ridge count fewer enemy tents, then fewer still, then none. They didn't break, they ebbed. Snow has erased their tracks in hours, but you know where they went, toward roofs and oats and the kind of victory that looks like not dying. Your commander refuses to chase. He simply writes a neat line in the daybook. Held ground. Men standing. Horses standing. Firewood adequate. Bread thin. You want to frame the sentence. It is the epigraph of the season. A messenger from a nearby town arrives with gossip you savor like hot wine. Your foes sent home a letter blaming unseasonable conditions, which is winter's favorite joke. Seasonable is exactly what it is. Another rumor claims their lord banned the phrase as cold as from camp because no simile survived inspection. You sympathize. Comparisons wear out faster than socks out here. As you shoulder your cloak and stamp life into your feet. You understand why some chronicles read like weather reports with footnotes. Endurance is not glamorous, but it's decisive. The army that keeps its bowstrings pliant, its horses upright, its fires alight, and its humor above freezing collects victories that never make the bard's greatest hits. No banners ripped, no duels at dawn, just a quiet accumulation of unbroken mornings. And when, at last, a cautious cheer lifts from the lines, not triumph, but relief, you add your breath to the clouded air and let the sound drift skyward. The field belongs to the patient. The road ahead belongs to the fed. And winter, having made its point, allows you, for one blessed moment, to feel your fingers again. The battlefield is silent now, covered in snow that erases every scar of what is past. You walk slowly among drifts where tents once stood, where fires once crackled, where groans and laughter once shared the same air. Winter has tucked it all beneath a white quilt, as if eager to conceal the memory of suffering. What remains are stories, some etched in chronicles, others whispered by survivors, and others yet that linger like ghosts in the frost. Knights who endured these frozen campaigns earned a peculiar afterlife in legend. You hear one tale of a band of warriors found years later encased in ice, standing upright as though still waiting for battle. Peasants claimed they heard the clink of their armor whenever the wind blew across the valley. Another story insists that horses left behind on icy fields turned wild and grew coats so thick they looked like shaggy bears, haunting forests for generations. You smile faintly, because in winter, even exaggeration feels believable. Here's your historical anchor. The most famous icy legend is the 1242 battle on Lake Peipus, when Alexander Nevsky of Novgorod defeated the Teutonic Knights. Chronicles say the enemy heavy cavalry plunged through cracking ice into freezing water, though scholars debate whether that dramatic image was literal or symbolic. What's certain is the memory stuck, becoming one of the enduring frozen night stories of Europe. Quirky tidbit. In alpine villages, parents once warned children not to stray into snowstorms by telling them the armored men of winter would take them. Whether those warnings sprang from folklore or half-remembered campaigns, the image of frozen nights marching in endless blizzards lingered in bedtime threats. Historians still argue whether these icy legends reflect history or myth-making. Were frozen nights a reality of battlefield tragedy or inventions to make victories sound more miraculous? Walking through the hush, you realize it doesn't matter. The line between fact and legend is blurred here, covered in frost like everything else. The soldiers who survived go home with memories colder than their steel. They tell tales of bread so hard it cracked teeth, of rivers that swallowed armies whole, of armor that froze a man's joints tighter than shackles. And their children retell the tales, polishing them into legends where winter itself is an opponent, cunning and cruel. You look once more at the snowbound plain. The wind sighs, carrying both silence and memory. And you know, the real story of the frozen nights isn't just about battles or kings. It's about endurance. It's about men who outlasted the cold and others who became part of it, frozen into history as much as into legend. Asterisk and now, let the battlefield fade from view. The fires are out, the tents are gone, and the snow covers everything in soft silence. No banners whip, no arrows fly, no armor clinks. Just the hush of winter, endless and gentle. Breathe in slowly, feeling the calm fill your chest, and breathe out even slower, letting the tension drift away like mist on cold air. The warriors who fought here have long since laid down their burdens, their obsessions, their fears. The snow has softened every sharp edge, turning pain into memory, memory into quiet. You walk through the white field one last time, your boots leaving light impressions that vanish behind you. The air is crisp, but no longer cruel. It's calm, still patient. Each step feels easier, as if the weight of armor has slipped from your shoulders. You hear nothing but the faint whisper of wind, like a lullaby too ancient to name. You realize that, like those nights, you too have endured your own long march. And now, unlike them, you have permission to rest. No battle awaits you, no icy river to cross, no watch to keep. Only the gentle certainty that you can let go. Close your eyes. Let the snowy plain dissolve into warmth. Let the flickering shadows of fire fade to stillness. Feel your breath slow, steady, soft. The frozen nights are at peace now. You are at peace too.